reading this lecture is on building trust, self-awareness, and how we can be better followers and leaders. And that's all part of the whole context of building trust, is that leaders have to trust followers, followers have to trust leaders, and one of the key ways that we develop trust is making sure that we are self-aware, that we're willing to self-disclose as need be in order to create a more authentic relationship with our leaders and followers. And trust is really the most important thing that we can do in the context of our organization, because if we trust the people that we work with, and we don't trust our employer to do what they say, if we don't trust our employees to do what they say, we're going to end up with an organization that doesn't function. So it is really important that we function in a way to make sure that we are maximizing the trust that we can build with our employees. So trust, as it says there, is a very complex concept. It's multifaceted, but it really is about how we have faith in or we believe in someone's integrity or reliability. And so I have to believe that you are going to follow through and be consistent in what I ask of you, and vice versa. You need to be able to trust me. And so we look at trust. There are 5 basic elements of trust. And a lot of times we think about integrity and trust as the same thing, but in fact, integrity is a key part of trust, but it is not the only thing that goes into building trust with our employees and with others. We also need competence, right? We need to have the capability of doing something appropriately and doing something well. We need to have consistency, which means that my level of performance is going to be consistent, my ability to deliver is consistent, you can always depend on me to be able to do something, and I can always depend on you to do something. It also has an element of loyalty, and loyalty is very important. If we want to trust somebody, we also know that if we trust them, that we're going to be loyal to them. It means we've got their back, and they should have our back. Lastly, elements of openness. We need to be open. We need to be able to self-disclose elements and essentials of who we are as people, what our values are, what's important to us. So these 5 things are key, and all of those have to be worked on and developed in order for us to have trust. There are a multitude of things that we can do to be able to build trust, and the organization has the responsibility itself to make sure that it is creating a context where trust can thrive. And so to have a culture where trust is a big part of that, it emphasizes having deep relationships with others. And that's not to say that we are best friends forever and we're going to have all our meals together and vacation together. And that's not what we're talking about in terms of depth. Depth means that we understand each other, that we understand each other's values, that we know and we can anticipate what each other needs, and we work together cooperatively. That's the depth of relationship we're talking about. People need to understand their roles and their responsibilities and what is important to the organization, and what they owe to the organization and vice versa, what the organization owes to them. And those boundaries are very clear between the parties about what is expected of me, what is expected of you, and what is expected of the organization to support us. Communication has to be transparent, frequent, timely, forthright. We need to make sure when we're talking to our employees that we are not hiding things. Clearly, there are times when we can't give full information, we can't disclose something because it might be a company secret or we may not have full information and we don't want rumors to start. That's a different thing than assuming that our employees can't handle something or shouldn't know something when in fact it's something that they could very well know about and should know about. So we don't want to be hiding things from that. We want to be upfront about stuff and as transparent about stuff as possible. An organization with a good, strong culture of trust also cares about self-esteem, and it cares about making sure individuals feel like they can succeed in their job and that we don't tear people down in order to make them, to help them to succeed. We build people up to help them to succeed. Self-awareness is also goes part and parcel with that, I have to be what my hot buttons are. I have to be aware of what my strengths and weaknesses are. And when I'm aware of those things, it makes it easier for me to be more authentic with others. We need to have high levels of skill competence. Again, if I'm going to trust that you're going to do something, I need to make sure, first of all, that you have the skills. So I want to make sure that I train you. I want to make sure I hire the right people with the right skills. And then I'm going to let you go. And I'm going to let you fly and learn how to do all that things on your own. I'm there as a resource. I'm there as a support. But I have to trust you because I've given you the skills, or I've trained you in those skills, that you can go ahead and do that work on your own. We also have clarity, a shared purpose, a direction, or a vision, and that, again, also requires good communication from top management. Everybody knows what their role is in the organization. Everybody knows what the purpose of the company is and where we're headed, where we want to be, what drives us, what binds people together in this company and makes this company successful. Lastly, it honors promises and commitments. You don't want to, make a lot of empty promises to people, because ultimately people stop believing you. It's sort of like the boy who cried wolf. You can only say there's a wolf here so many times before I stop believing you and that there's not a wolf. And it's the same thing with the company. If the company says, oh, yeah, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, ultimately, in the end, you have to follow through. And if you're going to make a commitment to do something, follow through and make that happen. And the employees are expected to do the same thing. If you're going to promise me that something's going to get done, you need to follow through on it, and you need to get it done at the time that you promised you would get it done. So that's all part of the building trust concept. So how can managers help develop trust with their employees and with others in the organization? And the first thing I would recommend to you is to always practice what you preach. If you're holding your employees to a standard, then you need to make sure that you're holding yourself to that standard. So you can talk all day long, but if you don't show people by example what is expected, people aren't going to do what you say. They're going to watch you and do what you do. So that's an important thing to remember. We always want to make sure that there's open lines of communication, that people know that they can talk, and that feedback is always welcomed, and critical analysis is always welcomed. Criticizing people is one thing. That's not really acceptable. But criticizing, idea or behavior in a constructive way, that's always beneficial. So people need to know that there's an open line of communication where they can give feedback, that even if they say to their boss, that's not going to work, I don't think that's a good idea, can I please explain to you why I think it's a bad idea, then you'll notice that with an open line of communication, you're getting constructive information from your followers, and your followers are getting constructive information from you, and it's a two-way street at workdays. So that open line of communication is key. We also have to recognize that we're going to have differences, that there are people are going to disagree on things. Not everything is going to be in line. We have conflict and all sorts of other problems. So the goal here is we're not looking to create wedges. We're looking to find solutions and get the best of both worlds from people. We want to make sure that we're keeping confidential information confidential, so that when someone shares something private with you, that it is staying private. We also need others to know what we value, what we stand for. If people don't know that about us, and they don't know what we value, they don't know what are the things that really drive us, they're not going to be able to support us. You're going to feel like you're out there floundering if you don't. People, no, I will not stand for that. That's not acceptable. That won't work for me. So it's really important that we be as upfront and as open as possible, an open book if we can be, not on every nuance of our private lives, because our private lives are private, but there's no reason why you cannot be authentic and say, no, I value this, and this is really important, and this is how it needs to proceed. Additional tips for managers to develop trust is to make sure that there is an open environment where everybody can be safe, where they can share things with you if they need to, whether it's something personal going on in their life that may make it difficult for them to perform their job the way they want to. And we're not talking necessarily about health issues, but it could be, personal issues. Someone's going through a divorce, a child is very sick, a parent is dying. There's all sorts of factors that are going to get tossed at you, and as managers, we want to make sure that we're keeping confidential information from your followers. And your followers are getting constructive information from you, and you're getting constructive information from them. So you're managing people. You're not managing robots. You're not managing raw materials. You're managing people who have all sorts of feelings and emotions, and they bring them to work. And it's your responsibility as a manager to make it safe for them to be able to share those things with you. Because if they don't feel safe, they're not going to share. And if they don't share, then you're going to miss out on ways that you can better support your employees to be the best employees that they can be. You also need to make sure you bring integrity and honesty to the table, that you have strong ethics, that you are communicate your ethics and what's important to you. So you understand what your lens is, you understand why you look at things the way you look at it, whether you're a universalist or you're a utilitarian or you're a virtue person or a justice person. It kind of doesn't matter. I mean, I think all it really matters is that you let people know this is the frame of reference that I work within, this is the way I think about these things, and hopefully you will be able to help me manage that. Know yourself and know your limitations. Know your strengths, know your weaknesses. That's the first step in good management, is knowing yourself first. You can't manage others if you don't know what your own strengths and weaknesses are. So once you can identify those and you accept where your limitations are, you accept that, this is your decision-making style, that someone else is good at a different decision-making style, that this is your way of dealing with things, but somebody else does a really good job dealing with different things differently, then your goal is to be able to work with those individuals, except when you have to step back and let someone else take over, or take the lead for a while. And it's okay. This is about empowering people. It's not about your ego. This is about letting people learn and grow, and also recognizing your own strengths and learning, and you learning from that as well. You want to be credible. You want to be able to demonstrate that you are consistent and reliable at all times. Obviously, there are times when we have to change gears. We would love to be consistent always, but it's not always an option. But the more that you can be consistent in the message that you communicate to your employees, the better off you are. Lastly, we want to avoid micromanaging, because the art of micromanaging, by definition, says I don't trust you. It means I have to hang over you. It means I need to get all this information because I'm insecure. Now, micromanagement is managed in a two-way street, right? The employee has to earn trust. And it's possible until that trust is earned, the boss may be micromanaging, probably more than that employee may be comfortable with. At the same time, once the employee demonstrates competency and they are able to do the work, then that manager needs to step back and say, I trust you, I've trained you, you should know how to do this job, go to town, make it happen. So micromanagement is probably the biggest It's the biggest thing that's going to destroy relationships with your employees, is if you micromanage them every step of the way, even after you've trained them and after you've told them what to do, to still be on top of them. It is a very frustrating, stressful situation to put an employee in, and it creates stress for you. One of the best ways to really manage a micromanager is to make sure they have information. If they have information and they have every bit of information that's in front of them that they can anticipate needing is there, they are less likely to micromanage. And so I think it's really important for employees to recognize what their boss needs and make sure that their boss has what they need so they can feel comfortable too. Self-disclosure, as I said, is an important part of the mix of things that you need to do in order to build trust with people. And it's a very hard thing for many people to do, particularly introverts, particularly people who feel incredibly and intensely private. They don't feel comfortable with being able to reveal certain things about themselves. But I think people need to know that you're human. And we know that the more that we can let others know something about us, it does create a reciprocal process that people are more likely to tell us things, to tell us their secrets, to tell us their concerns. And that reciprocal process is really what builds the trust between the employer and the employee, between the manager and the subordinate, and between the subordinate and the manager, that vice versa. So what kinds of things would you want to know? I need to know what motivates you. I need to know what excites you. What are your career aspirations? What is it that you want to do? What is it that you want to accomplish in life? I need to know what you fear. I need to know what you're scared of. And we'd like to all think that we're not scared of things, but we all are at some level or another. So, being able to self-examine and to recognize, what it is you fear and how that inhibits you from being the best employee you can be is really important. You need to be able to talk about your working style. What is the way that you like to work best? In a team, on your own, in a quiet office, with noise surrounding you. Everybody has a different working style, and it's important that we identify that as quickly as we can. What are your strengths and weaknesses? What strengths do you bring to the table? What weaknesses do you bring to the table? All in all, knowing all of these things, like motivations, fears, strengths, weaknesses, etc. These are the things that make us feel a little vulnerable, yes, but it's only with vulnerability can you build trust. If you can't make yourself vulnerable, then you're not going to be able to trust yourself and others. So the biggest and most challenging part of making yourself, to building trust, is to make yourself vulnerable to another person and to say, I have to let go and I have to trust this person's going to do what I ask them to do. So there are plenty of things, though, as we've already talked about in the previous slides, that you can do to help build that trust. You can train your employees. You can make sure they have all the resources they need to do their job. When you've done everything you can to build that trust, then there's no reason why you can't be vulnerable, because you've done everything to help them to be the best worker they can. And they won't let you down. People, if you build an authentic relationship with someone, they have no interest in letting you down. They have an interest in living up to your standards and to making you proud of what they're trying to do. So what does effective self-disclosure look like? Self-disclosure isn't about sharing things, and I think this is where men and women may struggle with some differences. Women tend to share feelings much more often than men do. Men tend to share facts or shared experiences. When we're self-disclosing, this is about sharing feelings. This is really about saying, this frightens me, this motivates me, this excites me, this angers me, this is my strength, this is my weakness. And while strengths and weaknesses are sort of couched in the form of facts, those strengths and weaknesses are linked to emotions. I am proud of my strengths, and I am unhappy with my weaknesses, or I'm fearful of my weaknesses. So I think that we have to be able to allow feelings to come out. And anybody that tells you there's no room for feelings in the workplace is inappropriate. We're not talking about, high-end emotionality and people having meltdowns, but we're talking about being able to say, this scares me, this frightens me, this excites me, this, makes me happy. These are important emotions, and if we don't have workers that feel comfortable being able to express their emotions, that's not going to lead to authenticity in the workplace. Being able to have authentic emotions is a key part of being authentic, and that helps us then to build authentic relationships. Additional ways of thinking about effective self-disclosure is making sure that we are disclosing things with more breadth and more depth over time. We don't expect to share every single part of their deep, dark secrets and histories and feelings and emotions in the workplace. You start small. Hey, that project, was a little intimidating, but I'm really glad that we got through it. And this is what made it intimidating to me, blah, 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 blah. Great, well, let's work on how we can help you to feel less intimidated in those contexts. And so once you disclose the first time, it makes it easier to disclose the second time, and then instead of disclosing in this narrow area, I can disclose more broadly, and ultimately I can be myself authentically without worrying about somebody, criticizing me in that context. Focus on the present rather than the past. Again, when it comes to self-disclosure, I don't need to know what happened 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 2 years ago. Only if it informs how we can learn from that mistake or learn from that issue to improve for the future. That's kind of the goal, right? But there are sometimes skeletons really shouldn't be shared. People don't want to know about your relationship, the broad details on your relationship woes and, specific, private nuances of your relationships in your life and your health conditions. To know that I have a health condition, sure, but to know every nuanced detail about it is a very different story. So I think there are people who are big sharers. They share everything. They have no filters, and they don't know when to stop. And then there are people that don't share enough. And so obviously the goal is trying to find that happy medium. Some cultures are more closed and some cultures are more open, but again, the culture eventually shifts to adapt to the way people want to be. So people want to be open and people are open to that, then, openness becomes a big part of that. But, focus on where you're at on past, unless that past informs a lesson to be learned in terms of how we can fix for the future. Lastly, it's reciprocity. If someone is disclosing to you, you want to match that. You want to reciprocate that. The only way you can build a relationship with someone is to allow some self-disclosure to occur. They will hopefully match it, and then you build back and forth to make sure that builds some familiarity and builds the trusting relationship that you want. There are enormous numbers of benefits of self-disclosure, and there's a huge literature around self-disclosing if someone has a stigmatized identity. And we know that, for example, if someone has a stigmatized identity, that self-disclosure is a better thing for them. Again, it enables them to be more authentic as an individual and decreases their stress and things like that. And we've talked some about that in the lecture on diversity. But there, any kind of self-disclosure, by being honest about your own strengths and weaknesses and fears and things like that, these also have the same kinds of benefits. We get psychological relief. It validates the way that we see the world when we can share that we have fears and someone else goes, yeah, me too. And then we realize that, what we're perceiving is fair and it's reasonable. When we self-disclose, it can relieve some of our stress and tension, because if we're holding back and we don't want anybody to know that we're fearful about something or that we are really excited about something, that can create stress and tension for us. And we all know the direct relationship between stress and tension and the physiological effects on our body. When there's high levels of distress in our system, that has a negative impact on us physiologically. Their level of stress and tension is good, right? There's a sweet spot sort of there in the middle, that you want enough stress and tension to get people's attention, but not so much that they find it to be dysfunctional and not able to work. So keeping our stress levels down helps us to be more healthy physiologically, and we don't want the high levels of stress around that. And more benefits of self-disclosure is that we are being authentic in our communication. And so we have clearer communication with others. We have more enhanced relationships then when we can be more authentic. Teams are more productive when they really are clear and cohesive, and they are in tune with each other. They are more productive, and self-disclosure helps with self-awareness. A lot of times we disclose something, sometimes for the first time, when we realize, wow, it never really occurred to me how scared I was about that. I always felt this thing and I didn't know what it was. And so that builds more self-awareness for people. And the more that we practice self-awareness, the easier it is for us to be trustworthy and to accept trust from others. And so there are tremendous benefits of managing self-disclosure in a very positive way, not just around stigmas, but any kind of self-disclosure about ourselves with respect to our emotions and our fears and our dreams and our strengths and weaknesses. Clearly, people resist self-disclosure. We all do at one time or another, and largely because we're perceived as weak, we're perceived as vulnerable, because we are sharing about our feelings. So again, a company will say, you leave your feelings and emotions at the door, you're here to do a job. That's not true. People are complex and they bring emotions to the job, and we have to teach them how to manage that and what the expectations are around that. People are shy or they're introverted, and again, the self-disclosure becomes a really uncomfortable place because people feel like they're very private and they don't want aspects of themselves out there, but it is important that we find ways to talk about some key things like our values, what's important to us, what's essential, for us in terms of what motivates us and things like that. We begin small. You may never want to share everything, but, you can see how being introverted can certainly have a negative impact on your ability to self-disclose. Company culture. If the culture does not value, sharing those kinds of things, it's going to be very difficult to be more authentic in the workplace. And so I think we have to start with chipping away at that culture that says that disclosure is negative. And it's okay to take some time to work hard on developing better relationships with others, revealing some of our secrets and our problems and our concerns, and ensuring that we can start to develop a different kind of culture in our organizations. Hopefully, you don't have a company that punishes you for that, right? Or that there's a negative reinforcement that you get teased or harassed, for being authentic and for being more honest and disclosing things. And so we want to be careful about that. Lastly, it goes hand in hand with being perceived as weak or vulnerable, is then we think that somebody will use it against us. See, you told us that you did this, and now we're not going to let you do that anymore. It's like, well, I was trying to tell you that I was scared, but it doesn't mean that I didn't want to try it. I didn't want to try to, combat that fear and get over that, barrier that I had. And there are plenty of vindictive people out there that will use things against you. But I think, you as the manager need to set that tone with your own employees and build that relationship of trust. And that's up to you to do. Even if the company culture is challenging, you can build a one-on-one culture of trust and self-disclosure with your employees. And they need to know that it won't go any farther than your door. And that's it. That the relationship with you is where it begins and ends, and that's okay, because you guys will build a good relationship, even if the rest of the company culture isn't supporting that. The last basic topic that we want to cover is this idea of followership and leadership. And followership is as important, if not in many ways more important than leadership, because all of us, no matter what, will always be a follower of somebody in the company. Even the CEO of the company is accountable to the board of directors, right, or to customers, I guess if you think about it that way. So we all need to think about ourselves as followers and think about it with not a negative connotation, but a positive connotation. Followers, the term follower tends to come up, with these ideas of being weak or being passive or being mindless, and that's not what a follower does. A follower is not a passive sheep or a lemming that jumps off the cliff with following the lemming in front of them. A follower is somebody who is much more empowered than that, and being a good follower is not a weak position at all. In fact, it's a position of strength if you had a leader that truly values the followers that they're working with. I love this 10 Commandments of Followership, because these are really important for you to remember, even as you move into leadership positions, to also remember you're still a follower too. Number one, to make sure that the leader's value system is compatible with your own. How do you know that? Well, that comes from self-disclosure and trust, right? If you know what your leader's value system is, that enables you to see whether or not you're in alignment with that. If you're not in alignment, then you have to make some hard choices. But if you're in alignment, that's the first step of enabling you to be the best follower that you can be. Number two, being able to articulate your views and positions prior to any decision making. You should be able, and hopefully should be able, to walk into your boss's office and say, hey, we're talking about this project and I'm concerned about this. Can I share with you some of my concerns? Absolutely. So let's sit down and talk. The leader doesn't need somebody who just say yes, 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 because when you do that, they have the groupthink, right, where no one questions the boss. Everybody says yes, whatever you say. A good follower is willing and able to speak up and say, I have my doubts about this, and let me give you some of my critical feedback of why I think this may not work the way that we think it's going to work. And it still may ultimately be up to the boss to make that final decision, but you've done your due diligence. You've stepped in and you've said what you could to make that work. Again, if you're in a circumstance then where the leader has to make a decision, that's when you have to close ranks. You may not like the decision, but once the leader makes that decision and you feel that you've had your voice in the process, we close ranks once that decision is made and we stand behind that boss. That's good followership. Because we have to trust that our boss has our best interests at heart. If we don't have that trust, then that is not going to work. We're not going to be able to close ranks. We have to be able to trust that that leader has our interests at heart. Number 4, alert the leader about progress towards the goal. So this avoids the micromanagement problems. I'm always communicating. It's upward communication to my boss, so my boss always knows what's happening, that they're aware of where things are at, they're aware of the pluses and minuses are, the strengths and weaknesses, the progress we're making. All those sorts of things have to be communicated so that the boss isn't surprised when, the director of marketing or the director of, manufacturing comes in their office and says, oh my God, I can't believe this. And your boss is like, I had no idea. Why didn't my employees tell me? So you don't want to embarrass your boss. You always want to make sure there's information. And that sort of leads you to, that sort of ties you into point 4 and 5, right? Alert the leader to your progress and keep your leader fully informed. They don't want to be surprised. The remaining parts of those 10 commandments. Number 6 is never take a public position without first informing the leader in private of your intention. And you might be invited to a meeting that has your boss and a number of other people involved. It's important you let your boss know in advance that you might be standing up for an unpopular position. You want your boss to know. You don't want your boss to be surprised by that. And that doesn't mean your boss has to agree with you, but they have to respect that your opinion is one of value, and that's why you're being brought in to share this information in the first place, right? So don't take a public position on anything unless you let your leader know what your position is and what your intention is in terms of managing that. If you're a follower and you're a member of a team, you're a part of a team. This is not about personal aggrandizement. Again, we all want to rise to the top. We all want to be the next person that's promoted or, offered a new position somewhere, looking for personal recognition. But it's not about personal aggrandizement, meaning that you're going to walk into a circumstance and go, hey, I'm the best person. See, didn't you see what I did? Aren't I amazing? Aren't I great? Aren't I wonderful? That's not going to fly with your team members. Your team members will tell you if you were really great and wonderful, they're going to tell you you're great and wonderful. And vice versa, you should do the same for them. That was a great idea. That was a great way you handled that. I'm really proud of you. And the work on the team, and we all sort of made that work together. Your boss is going to see that. Your boss is going to be able to know who's ready and who's not for the next promotion. And no matter how much you yell about yourself and how good you are, that's not always going to get you far. You don't want to disparage your other followers. By disparaging others, you look like the sour grapes person, or you look like somebody who's trying to sabotage others, and that's not going to fly well with the boss. If you can't play well, with your team members, how do they know that you're going to be able to play well, at higher levels of the company where it's going to involve, a lot of compromise in order to make things work at the higher levels of the company. Number 9, fully convey the doubts and positions of colleagues to your leader. So, if a colleague comes up to you and says, I'm really concerned about this, I'm not sure it's going to work, you know what? It's okay for you to go to your boss and say, some of the team members have said this specifically. Obviously, if the person is not comfortable sharing a name, you can say, one of the team members shared this with me, wanted to communicate this with you because they didn't feel comfortable being able to talk with you. I want you to know some people are having some problems and some concerns with this. Can I share with you? Can I sit down and talk about it? A good boss is open to hearing that information. Lastly, loyalty is a two-way street. Yes, we'd like you to be loyal to your boss, right? And that's the goal. It's about building that trust, the relationship, as we've talked about. But that boss has to be loyal to you. If your boss is hurting you in some way, in terms of your career or hurting you personally, that's not loyalty, and you shouldn't be loyal to somebody who's not treating you fairly and well. But it is. It's a two-way street. You have to be loyal to your boss, to the company, and vice versa. They have to be loyal to you. So it really is important that you see this trusting relationship working in a two-way direction. Poor followership ends up in a whole lot of different kinds of behaviors. For example, if you're engaging in defensive behaviors, certain types of defensive behaviors are about avoiding action, right? Where you overconform to something because you're trying to avoid doing something else. You pass the buck, or you just play stupid. Stalling is also a form of poor followership. It's like, oh, I don't want to do this. If I stall long enough, somebody else will pick up the slack. Again, poor follow. Sometimes you can do things to avoid blame, or you bluff, or you scapegoat, or you misrepresent, or you sort of escalate your commitment to something because you're not willing to accept the fact that something failed. Decision-making bias play a big part of how we engage in poor followership, because we are fearful of being seen as a failure, so we engage in all sorts of things like escalating commitments and things like that. And another form of defensive behavior in poor followership is resisting change or protecting our turf. It's like, I don't share information because I want to make sure that I can keep my job. The information, it's not going to help you save your job, honestly. In the end, if someone wants to get rid of you, they're going to get rid of you, even if it's at the cost of losing the information you might have. You may be able to hang on for a while on that, but in the end, it's really about making sure that you don't have dysfunction in the company. And if you represent dysfunction, even if you've got some key knowledge, I'd rather hit you to the curb and start from scratch and rebuild from scratch, rather than trying to work with someone who's not willing to be a team player. The last aspect of poor followership is someone who engages in political games. And usually these are people who resist authority, or they're constantly creating rivalries in a quest for more power. They are trying to whistleblow or overthrow power. And I'm not talking about whistleblowing when it's authentic, right? When there's a real reason to whistleblow. But a lot of times people will whistleblow for things that really aren't important or really didn't happen, but they do that in order to create a distraction, in order to pull attention away from what's really happening. Power-based games, same sort of thing, where we try to attach ourselves to really powerful sponsors, and so that we've got a powerful ally somewhere, and it's all like Survivor, the TV show, right? It's where we have alliances and powerful people here, and we all are trying to hurt each other and stab each other in the back. And when you're playing political games, you're not a follower, and you're not looking out for your team, and you're not looking out for your boss. You're all playing games. So the more that we can focus on what it takes to be a good follower and making sure we're doing our job well, rather than worrying about the political behaviors, better off we'll be overall. So this lecture sort of basically concludes the information on the building trust, right? And in order for us to build trust, we want to make sure that we have authentic relationships with others, and that we are willing to self-disclose, and that we're willing to make ourselves vulnerable. But we also have a responsibility, if we want a trusting relationship with someone, is we have to model that behavior. We also have to make sure that we are creating communication and transparency with our followers, and making sure that we are modeling the behaviors that we want them to engage in. And then, followership and leadership really go hand in hand, and being a good follower is just as important as being a good leader. So it's important that we don't engage in games and don't engage in other bad behaviors that will interfere with the ability to have a good, trusting relationship in our organization, in our culture, and with our employees and peers.